The whispering library, the air in the town of Oakhaven always tasted of dust and forgotten things. But in the vicinity of the Blackwood estate, it tasted specifically of moldering parchment and an unsettling silence. Elias Thorne, a man whose passion for rare manuscripts bordered on obsession, felt the peculiar chill of the place settle deep in his bones. The moment his rented car crunched gravel onto the estate's sprawling, overgrown drive. The Blackwood Library, the reason for Elias's pilgrimage, was not merely a collection of books. It was a legend. Built a century ago by the reclusive bibliophile Silas Blackwood, it was rumored to house volumes so unique, so occult, that their mere presence could warp the atmosphere. Silas and his lineage had vanished 20 years prior, leaving the estate and its priceless hoard sealed and untouched until now. Elias, having successfully negotiated access through a labyrinthine legal process, was the first outsider to step inside. The library itself was a Gothic behemoth, a stone wing attached to the main manor, taller than it was wide. Its windows, high and arched, were obscured by grime and climbing ivy, filtering the late afternoon sun into sickly, greenish shafts. The caretaker, a gaunt, perpetually frowning man named Mr. Graves, unlocked the heavy oak doors with a key that looked like a relic itself, its brass worn smooth by decades of disuse. The sound of the tumblers clicking echoed in the oppressive stillness. "It's as they left it, sir," Graves rasped, his voice dry as kindling. "Don't touch the books on the uppermost shelves. The wood's rotten up there. A&D, don't stay past midnight. The place has a temper after the clock strikes 12. Elias, his mind already alight with anticipation, barely heard the warning. He stepped across the threshold, and the smell enveloped him. A potent, intoxicating blend of age, leather, dry ink, and something else. Something metallic, like old blood, or perhaps just ozone. The space inside was breathtaking and terrifying. 3 stories of towering shelves, each one groaning under the weight of thousands of volumes, spiraled upwards into a dim, vaulted ceiling. A wrought iron staircase corkscrewed in the center, and balconies offered access to the higher tiers. The air was thick, heavy, muffling sound. Graves grunted a farewell and retreated, the heavy door thudding shut behind him, plunging Elias into a deeper silence. He was alone with the books. Elias began his work methodically, catalog in hand, but the sheer volume and the unsettling atmosphere quickly derailed his academic focus. He ran his hand over the spine of a massive tome bound in what felt like dried, flayed skin. It was untitled, unmarked, and radiated a coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He resisted the urge to pull it out not yet. He needed to assess the collection's overall nature first. Hours passed, marked only by the slow decay of the daylight. Elias's initial excitement was gradually replaced by a rising tide of unease. This was not a normal library. The organization, where it existed, was nonsensical. Volumes on botany, set beside treatises on infernal alchemy. A first edition of Shelley was wedged next to a book whose cover was simply a series of interlocking bronze plates, vibrating faintly to his touch. He was examining a row of thin, black notebooks on the second tier. When he first heard it, it was a sound like a breath, a faint, almost inaudible sigh, coming from the shadowed shelves above. He froze, his hand millimeters from a notebook bound in rough, woven linen. Whoosh! It happened again, closer this time, like a whisper without words, the rustle of dry paper, or perhaps the turn of a page. Graves? Graves? Elias called out, his voice sounding ridiculously loud, swallowed instantly by the vast, high space. Silence. Only the thrumming of his own pulse answered him. He dismissed it as the house settling, the wind finding a weak spot in the mortar, but the prickling sensation on the back of his neck persisted. He quickly jotted down the details of the linen notebook. It felt warm. Feverishly so, Anne moved on, a new urgency driving his movements. The true drama began when he reached the third, uppermost tier. The air here was noticeably colder, and the carpet of dust was thicker. Graves hadn't been exaggerating. The wooden supports for the shelves were warped, some visibly splitting. This was clearly the forbidden section. Here, The books were different. They weren't just old. They felt hostile. They were bound in materials Elias couldn't name. Petrified wood, hammered silver, and what looked and smelled alarmingly like human bone. He found one, almost hidden in the corner, that was wrapped in tightly cinched chains. The metal rusted and pitted, as if the book itself was struggling to break free. He found his quarry amidst this terrifying collection. The legendary Codex Umbra, a text supposedly penned by the alchemist Dr. John Dee, and annotated by subsequent generations of a volume so rare its existence was often relegated to myth. It was unassuming, a slim volume bound in dark green suede, but its surface seemed to absorb the meager light. As Elias reached for it, a sudden, jarring noise ripped through the silence. A single book, a thick leather volume from the shelf below his, crashed to the wooden floor, landing open. Elias stumbled back, adrenaline spiking. The crash was violent, shocking. He started down, breathing hard. The open book lay face up, revealing a page of intricate spidery script and an illustration of an eye, drawn with horrifying realism, staring directly at him. He knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic, that no natural force had dislodged that book. He looked up at the shelves. In the momentary dust motes, swirling in the narrow beam of his flashlight, he caught a glimpse of movement. Not a human figure, but a shift in the darkness, a shadow detaching itself from the high ceiling, like ink bleeding into water. He snatched the Codex Umbra and tucked it securely into his messenger bag, his hands shaking. The hunt was over, replaced by a desperate need to escape. As he turned to descend the spiral staircase, he heard the sounds multiply. They were all around him now, faint yet distinct. Thump, thump, the sound of books being gently placed on the floor, one by one, and then the sickening creak of the iron staircase railing, as if something immense had pressed against it from below. He gripped the wrought iron banister and began his descent, his eyes glued to the shadowy well of the library's center. On the second tier, he paused, flashlight beam cutting a frantic arc. The library was no longer silent. It was murmuring. The whispers he'd heard earlier were now a low, pervasive chorus, a dry, papery seek, find, mine. The words were indistinct. They weren't coming from the air. They were coming from the books. The leather and parchment around him were sighing, groaning, their pages stirring of their own accord. Elias, Ron. He flew down the last flight of stairs, stumbling onto the ground floor. He didn't look back, but he felt the presence loom heavy, demanding, and immensely cold. He reached the great oak doors, fumbling with the deadbolt. The key was still in the lock, but his hands were slick with cold sweat. Click, click. The mechanism grated, resisting. Behind him, the dramatic silence was shattered. The entire central column of shelves, 3 stories high, began to shudder. Books, thousands of them, launched from the shelves as if thrown by an invisible, powerful force. They rained down, heavy, deadly missiles of knowledge and rage, striking the marble floor with dull, bone-jarring thuds. "Get out!" Elias screamed, twisting the key with all his might. It turned. He yanked the door open and burst outside, gasping for the relatively clean, cool air of the night. He didn't stop to look at the Blackwood Library one last time. He ran, not toward his car, but straight out into the dark, overgrown drive. The crunch of gravel beneath his feet was a frantic, desperate rhythm. As he reached the road, the suspense reached its horrifying peak. A figure stood silhouetted against the weak moonlight, barring his path. Mr. Graves, the caretaker. Graves did not look at Elias. His head was tilted back, listening. The sound that emanated from the Blackwood Library was no longer a murmur, no longer a crash. It was a single, sustained, high-pitched screamer sound of immense, non-human fury, as if the very stone of the building were being torn apart from the inside. Graves slowly turned his head, his eyes catching the moonlight. They were not the eyes of a tired, old man. They were wide and focused, and gleamed with a chilling, fanatic devotion. "You took what wasn't yours, Mr. Thorne," Graves whispered, his voice resonating with an unearthly calm. The Blackwood knows its own. It always comes for the ones who steal its story. Behind the caretaker, the massive oak door of the library swung violently inward on protesting hinges. A profound, consuming shadow stretched across the lawn, not cast by the moonlight, but emanating from the doorway itself. It was the absence of light, a rippling, viscous darkness that seemed to possess mass and velocity. Ilias didn't hesitate. He shoulder-charged Graves, sending the frail man sprawling, and sprinted past him, toward the hazy lights of Oakhaven in the distance. He heard the caretaker's mad laughter echo behind him, swallowed instantly by a wet, tearing sound from the library's interior, followed by a new noisa relentless, rapid thump-thump-thump, the sound of countless pages turning at supernatural speed. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs failed him, eventually collapsing beside a moss-covered stone wall miles from the estate. The next morning, when the police finally located the Blackwood estate after Ilias's frantic, incoherent call from a roadside payphone, they found the manor untouched, silent, and sealed. The Blackwood Library, however, was gone. Not burned, not collapsed. The entire stone wing had vanished, leaving only a perfect, circular patch of freshly disturbed earth, as if the ground itself had swallowed it whole. All that remained was the terrifying, undeniable proof of Elias Thorne's ordeal. Back at the wall where he had collapsed, amidst the dew and the fallen leaves, they found his discarded messenger bag. Inside, the single, slim volume of the Codex Umbra was perfectly intact. Elias never looked at the book again. He tried to burn it, bury it, even shred it, but the book resisted all harm. It sat on his desk, silently observing. He never regained his academic footing, his obsession with rare books replaced by a paralyzing fear of them. He would often wake in the night, the sound of tearing paper echoing in his ears, and the terrifying knowledge that he hadn't just stolen a book. He had stolen the library's voice, and the whispers had followed him home, waiting for the day he was weak enough to open the codex and allow the story to finally consume its reluctant scribe. The last time anyone saw Elias, he was sitting in his darkened apartment, staring at the green suede book. His hands were clasped over his ears, and he was rocking gently, whispering a single, desperate plea into the silence. Stop turning the pages. But in the periphery of his vision, in the dim, stale air of his study, the shadow of the Blackwood estate lingered, and the sound of dry, rustling parchment continued, promising the climax of a story that was now his own.